"Don't you dare die on me. I don't even know your name, but don't you dare." He was bleeding. She was barely breathing, and the truck above them groaned like it was deciding whether to crush them both. Nobody moved. 100 phones pointed straight at him, a homeless teenager with torn shoes and shaking hands crawling into fire to save a girl the world would mourn, but never risk a scratch for. That moment changed everything. If this story moves you, subscribe, drop your city in the comments, and let's see how far one act of courage can travel. The morning of the 4th of July started the way every morning started for Ethan Cole, with the particular silence of a person who has learned not to expect anything good from the day ahead. He was 17 years old. He had 32 cents in his left pocket, a cracked phone that hadn't held a charge in 3 weeks, and a backpack so worn down that the left strap had been replaced with a strip of electrical tape he'd found near a dumpster behind a hardware store on Clement Street. He'd slept the night before behind a shuttered laundromat, using the backpack as a pillow, using an old hoodie as a blanket, and using the slow hum of a distant air conditioning unit as a kind of white noise that kept the real sounds of the night, the arguments, the sirens, the random violence that the city tried to forget by daylight from keeping him fully awake. He hadn't always been this way, but that was a different story, one he had stopped telling even to himself. By 7 in the morning, Ethan was already walking. Not toward anything, just walking the way homeless teenagers learn to walk purposefully, eyes forward fast enough to look like he belonged somewhere slow enough not to draw attention. The town of Hollister, California was already buzzing. 4th of July in a small town meant flags on every porch, the smell of someone's grill firing up 2 hours too early, children in red and blue running in circles in front yards, and that particular American energy, loud, proud, slightly reckless, that Ethan had once loved and now watched from a careful distance, like a man watching a bonfire from just outside the ring of warmth. He stopped at the corner of Madison and Route 9, where a gas station convenience store had propped its door open. The smell of hot dogs rolling on a metal rack drifted out. Ethan's stomach tightened. He counted the 32 cents in his pocket for the second time. Still 32 cents. He kept walking. The parade route had already been roped off. Families had staked out spots along both sides of Main Street with lawn chairs and coolers, kids sitting on father's shoulders, older people, grandmothers mostly positioned at the front, with their hands already over their hearts as if the flag hadn't even passed yet, but they were already ready. Ethan drifted to the back of the crowd, staying near the edge, near the exits, the way you learn to do when you've spent enough time in spaces where you don't entirely belong. A woman near him glanced over her shoulder. She looked at his clothes, dirty jeans, the electrical tape backpack, the dried cut on his forearm he hadn't properly cleaned in 2 days, and she shifted her cooler slightly, angling her body just a few degrees away. It was the kind of rejection that didn't use words. Ethan noticed it. He didn't react. He'd stopped reacting to those a long time ago. He found a spot near a telephone pole about 40 yards from the main intersection, leaned against it, and watched. A man 3 people ahead of him was laughing loudly with someone on his phone describing some fireworks he'd bought from a stand outside of town. A little girl in a star-spangled dress was crying because she dropped her popsicle. Her father crouched down, whispered something to her, and she stopped crying almost immediately. Ethan watched that moment, the father crouching, the girl's face shifting from devastation to trust. In about 4 seconds, and he felt something move through his chest that he couldn't quite name and didn't try to. He looked away. That was when he heard the engine. It wasn't the sound of the parade. The parade was still 2 blocks away. He could hear the distant thumping of a marching band, the faint crackle of a loudspeaker doing a sound check. This was different. This was the sound of something mechanical going wrong. A grinding, a shift in pitch, the kind of sound that your body recognizes before your brain catches up with it, a sound that means this is not supposed to be happening. He straightened up from the telephone pole. A delivery truck, massive 18 wheels carrying what looked like cases of bottled water and aluminum kegs, was coming down Route 9 from the north. It was moving too fast. Ethan could see that immediately. Way too fast for a street that had been partially blocked off. Too fast for the amount of people who had already spilled off the sidewalks and into the edges of the road. And then with a sound, like a gunshot, a tire, he thought it must have been a rear tire, the truck lurched. It didn't just swerve, it didn't gently drift. It lurched the back end, swinging out sideways like something enormous had grabbed it and yanked. And then the whole vehicle went sideways across the intersection at Route 9 and Madison in a grinding, shrieking apocalyptic slide that sent people scattering in every direction, screaming, falling, running the crowd, detonating outward, the way a startled flock of birds explodes from a wire. Ethan didn't run. He didn't know why. Later, he would think about that moment, think about it in hospital waiting rooms, in quiet spaces in the weeks and months that followed, and he still couldn't fully explain it. Something in him just went still, and then something in him moved forward. The truck came to rest on its side at the center of the intersection. The cab crushed against a concrete barrier, the trailer jackknifed at a brutal angle across 3 lanes. There was a sound like the world exhaling, and then silence, that horrible, compressed 2-second silence that follows catastrophe before the screaming starts again, and then the screaming started again. People were running in every direction. Some toward the wreckage, most away from it. Phones were already going out, dozens of them, screens catching the morning light, capturing the sharing. The instinct to document now apparently arriving faster than the instinct to help. Ethan registered this distantly, the way you register weather. He was already moving toward the truck. A man grabbed his arm. Kid, stop. You can't go in there. Ethan looked at him. The man was in his 40s, well-dressed for a parade American flag polo shirt, khaki shorts, holding his own phone in his free hand, camera still open. Someone's under it, Ethan said. I know. The fire department is. You need to wait for. Someone is under it right now, Ethan said. Not loudly, not angrily, just with a flatness that made the man release his arm. He walked toward the wreckage. The heat reached him before the sight did. There was no fire yet, but fuel, he could smell it sharp, and chemical was spreading across the asphalt. And the truck's engine was making sounds that no engine should make after a crash. A ticking, clanking, unstable cycling that meant something inside was still running, still hot, still capable of making this dramatically worse. Twisted metal jutted in every direction. One of the truck's axles had sheared off and was embedded in the concrete barrier like a thrown spear. And beneath the trailer, half visible in the shadow and wreckage, was a person. She was young. He could tell that much. Teenage, maybe his age, maybe a year or two older. She'd been on a motorcycle. The crushed remains of it were visible, pinned under the trailer's rear section, and she hadn't been thrown clear. Her upper body was partially free, her legs trapped under the wreckage. Blonde hair fanned out across the asphalt, dark at the edges with blood. Hey! Ethan dropped to his knees at the edge of the trailer. Hey, can you hear me? She made a sound, not words, just a sound. Alive. Okay, he said to her and to himself. Okay. Damn. He assessed the gap the way he'd learned to assess any space he needed to fit into methodically without panic. The trailer had come to rest on one side, balanced at an angle, the undercarriage, creating a narrow crawl space maybe 20 inches high at its widest point. There was glass everywhere. The fuel smell was getting stronger. Hey! The voice came from behind him. A woman 50's phone down for once, face white with shock. What are you doing? You can't go under there if that thing shifts. I know, Ethan said. Then don't. Is anyone else going? He asked. She looked at the crowd, dozens of people, many with phones raised, a few with hands over their mouths. No one moving. She looked back at him. He pulled off his backpack, set it on the ground, and crawled into the gap. The world got very small, very fast. The concrete was hot against his forearms. Metal pressed down from above. Close, too close, he could feel the weight of the whole trailer through the air itself, could feel that it was not stable, that it was balanced on the wrong point, that it would not take much. Glass cut into his palms. Immediately he felt it, but kept moving. The smell of fuel was overwhelming now, coating the back of his throat, and somewhere above him, inside the truck's cab, something was sparking. He could see it, intermittent flashes of light through a gap in the metal. He reached her in about 8 seconds. Those 8 seconds felt like a separate category of time. Up close, she was more hurt than he'd been able to see from outside. There was a deep gash across her left cheek. Her left arm was at the wrong angle, broken probably or dislocated. She was wearing a leather jacket, a real one, heavy dark with some kind of patch on the back that he couldn't read in the shadows, and he was dimly grateful for it because the jacket had taken damage that might otherwise have gone to her. Hey, he said again now, 18 inches from her face. My name's Ethan. I'm going to get you out. Her eyes found him, unfocused, glassy, but there. She blinked. What's your name? He asked. He'd read somewhere or heard somewhere the origin of the knowledge didn't matter that you should keep an injured person conscious by getting them to respond. She made a sound that might have been a word. Say it again. Ashley. Ashley. He nodded like they were being introduced at a party, like this was entirely normal. I'm Ethan. I'm going to get your legs free. This is going to hurt. I need you to stay with me. My legs, she said slowly, are... I know, I've got you. The trailer had pinned her lower legs under a section of the chassis, not the full weight of the vehicle, thank God, but a cross-member bar that had come down across both ankles during the crash. Ethan couldn't lift the bar. He wasn't strong enough. Nobody was. But it wasn't fully flush against the ground on one end. There was maybe an inch and a half of clearance on the left side. He needed something to lever it. He looked around the crawl space. His backpack was outside. He had 32 cents, a cracked phone, and a strip of electrical tape. He looked at his belt. It was the kind of belt with a heavy metal buckle he'd found it 6 weeks ago in a donation bin outside a church, one of the better finds he'd had, because the buckle was solid brass and unusually thick. He took it off, folded it over, and threaded the buckle end under the cross-member bar where the clearance was. This is going to move, he told Ashley. When it does, when you feel it shift, you pull your legs toward you. You understand. You pull with everything you have. I can't, her voice was thin, fraying. My left leg, I can't really. The right one, and then pull the right one first. Okay. You ready? She looked at EM with those unfocused eyes, and somewhere behind the glassiness, something steadied. Yeah, she said, yeah, I'm ready. Ethan put his weight onto the belt buckle, using his full body as a lever, and he pulled up. The bar moved, a quarter inch, half an inch. The trailer above him groaned loudly, structurally, the sound of stressed metal, reconsidering its position, and every single person watching from outside collectively stopped breathing. Now, Ethan said through his teeth. Pull. Ashley pulled. Her right leg came free. Outside the wreckage, nobody spoke. A man in a fire department t-shirt, he'd been in the crowd watching the parade off-duty, not yet in gear, had appeared at the edge of the trailer, lying flat, trying to see into the gap. Hey, he called. Hey, kid, the left leg, she needs to rotate her hip before you lift again. If the ankle's caught, she needs to... I got it, Ethan called back. The fuel kid, the engine is... I know about the fuel, Ethan said. Give me 30 seconds. A silence from outside. Okay, the firefighter said. 30 seconds. Ethan turned back to Ashley. Her right leg was free. Her left leg was still caught differently, now rotated slightly by the motion of pulling the right one free. The ankle caught in a narrower space. Ashley, he put his hand on her shoulder. Look at me. She looked at him. Does your left ankle feel broken or just trapped? She was quiet for a moment, truly thinking about it, assessing through the pain. He respected that. Just trapped, I think. It's not, she winced. It doesn't feel broken. Good, I need you to turn it, like you're turning a key, inward toward me. Ethan, I know it hurts. Turn it anyway. She closed her eyes, turned it. He lifted the belt again, this time harder, putting everything he had into it, the muscles in his arms and shoulders, burning his hands slick with blood. From the glass cuts, and the bar rose, and Ashley Cole pulled her left leg free, and Ethan dropped the bar, grabbed her under the arms, and pulled. Go. They came out of the gap together, moving fast. Ethan dragging her backward by her jacket with both hands, his shoes finding purchase on the concrete. The crowd rushing forward as they cleared the edge of the trailer, and in that exact moment, 3 things happened simultaneously. The firefighter grabbed Ashley's arms from Ethan's hands, pulling her further clear. A paramedic who had arrived in the last 90 seconds dropped beside her, hands already moving. And the section of trailer Ethan had been crawling beneath shifted. Not collapsed, not yet, but shifted the balance point, changing the whole mass, tilting 3 inches to the left, with a sound like tearing metal and a concussive shudder that Ethan felt through the concrete under his hands and knees. If they'd still been under it, he didn't finish the thought. He sat up on the asphalt, 10 feet from the wreckage, bleeding from both palms, and looked at Ashley. The paramedics were on her. She was still conscious, barely. She was looking at the sky with the expression of someone who has just realized they are alive and isn't quite sure what to do with that information. Her jacket had ridden up during the extraction, and now for the first time Ethan could see the patch on the back of it clearly. He stared at it. A winged skull, red and gold. 3 words beneath it that he recognized the way you recognize a storm on the horizon, not because you know its name, but because your body knows what it means. Hell's Angels MC, and below that in smaller letters, property of Iron Hawk. The crowd was surging forward now. People were crying, someone was clapping, actually clapping, and Ethan couldn't quite process what that was for. A teenager near the edge of the crowd was still filming, but his phone hand had dropped about 6 inches, like he'd forgotten to hold it up. The firefighter crouched beside Ethan. "You're bleeding," he said. "Both hands." "I know. That was..." The firefighter paused, clearly selecting words carefully. "You probably shouldn't have done that." "Probably not. What's your name?" Ethan looked at the paramedics working on Ashley. He looked at the patch. He looked at the crowd of 100 people who had all been standing there with phones raised. "Ethan," he said. "Ethan Cole." "You live around here, Ethan." Ethan looked at the firefighter for a moment. Then he looked down at his bloodied hands. His worn jeans, his electrical tape backpack, still sitting exactly where he'd left it on the pavement, 32 cents somewhere in the pocket, cracked phone inside everything he owned in the world. "Yeah," he said quietly, "around here." A few feet away, the paramedic was speaking quickly into a radio. Ethan caught 3 words clearly, cutting through the crowd noise and the distant sound of sirens getting louder. "Stable but critical. Family notification. Ryder." Ethan went very still, because he'd seen that name before. He'd seen it on walls, seen it in newspaper stories someone had left on a bench, seen it in the way people in this part of California said it not loudly and never twice. Ryder. Ashley Ryder. He looked again at the patch. Property of Iron Hawk. And somewhere across a distance, he couldn't measure, a phone was ringing. And the name on the screen was one that made grown men stop talking. One that made rooms go quiet. One that belonged to a man who had built his legend, not from charity, not from grace, but from the absolute certainty that what was his was protected. Always, at any cost. Ethan sat on the asphalt bleeding, surrounded by the wreckage he'd crawled into and crawled back out of, and understood that the thing he'd just done, the thing that 100 people had filmed, but only he had actually done, had just pulled him out of the invisible world and dropped him very suddenly, very completely into the center of someone else's. He picked up his backpack. He put it over one shoulder, and he sat there because there was nowhere else to go. The sirens were very close now, and somewhere in the city, a phone was still ringing. The ambulance doors hadn't even closed before the rumors started moving through the crowd faster than the paramedics moved through traffic. Ethan heard pieces of it, fragments. The way information travels through a shaken crowd, not in complete sentences, but in bursts, in half whispers, in the kind of urgent shorthand people use when they're processing something they don't fully understand yet. That's Victor Ryder's daughter. Iron Hawk's kid, man, I'm telling you. Somebody said she was on her way to meet the chapter. God help whoever was driving that truck. Ethan sat on the rear bumper of a fire engine that had arrived 6 minutes too late to matter a paramedic, wrapping gauze around his right hand with the efficient, slightly detached focus of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. The woman, mid-30s, dark hair, pulled back name tag that said Renee, hadn't asked him many questions. Just the practical ones. Does this hurt? Can you feel that? Any pain in your chest or neck? You're going to need stitches on this one, she said, nodding at the deeper cut running across the base of his left palm. The right hand is okay with the bandaging. The left is not. I don't have insurance, Ethan said. Renee looked up at him just briefly. Her expression didn't change dramatically. She was too professional for that, but something moved behind her eyes. Recognition, maybe. Or just the particular kind of tired sadness that comes from hearing certain sentences too many times. We'll figure that out, she said. You're coming in the bus. I don't need, kid. She said it quietly, but with the weight of someone who was not asking. You just crawled under a jackknifed trailer with active fuel leak and sparking electrical. You are coming in the bus. Ethan looked at his hands. The gauze was already showing a faint pink bloom on the left side. Okay, he said. He didn't argue. Not because he agreed with her logic, but because the honest truth was that his hands had started shaking about 2 minutes ago, and he couldn't make them stop. The firefighter, the off-duty one, The one who had counted down 30 seconds and meant it appeared beside Renee. He was a big man, late 40s gray at the temples, with the kind of face that had seen a lot and learned to hold it without flinching. His name, Ethan would learn later, was Danny Castellano. He had been a firefighter for 22 years. He had pulled people from car wrecks, from burning houses, from industrial accidents, from situations that would have made a lesser man retire early and never speak of them again. He looked at Ethan the way people look at things they're still trying to categorize. "You knew the fuel could have gone," Danny said. It wasn't quite a question. "Yeah." "You knew if that trailer shifted." "Yeah." "And you went anyway." Ethan looked at him. "She was alive in there." Danny was quiet for a moment. Then he put his hand on Ethan's shoulder briefly, firmly, the way men like Danny express things they don't have words for, and then he walked away to talk to someone with a clipboard. Ethan looked down at the gauze on his hands. The shaking wasn't stopping. He realized sitting there that his body had been waiting to fall apart and was now very politely requesting permission to do so. He didn't give it, not yet, because across the clearing, near the edge of the perimeter that the police had started establishing with orange cones and yellow tape, a man in a Hollister PD uniform was talking into his radio, and Ethan could hear 3 words clearly even over everything else. "Notifying Iron Hawk." 3 words, 9 syllables, and the temperature of the air seemed to drop 5 degrees. The ambulance carrying Ashley Ryder pulled away. Ethan watched it go. He thought about the way she'd looked at him in the dark under that trailer, glassy-eyed, barely there but present. The way her face had changed when he told her his name. Like hearing a name made the situation real. Like she'd been floating somewhere between conscious and not. And his name, this stupid, ordinary name that nobody had said with any particular warmth, in a very long time, had been the thing that tethered her to the world for those few minutes. He hoped she made it. He hoped that the way she'd answered his questions, the steadiness that had come into her voice when she'd said, "Yeah, I'm ready." He hoped that was real and not just the adrenaline. He hoped she was tougher than she looked, lying broken on that asphalt. He had a feeling she was. The property of Iron Hawk Patch didn't end up on your jacket if you weren't. Renee appeared at his elbow. "Bus is ready." He picked up his backpack. The ride to Hollister Regional was 8 minutes. Ethan spent it sitting across from Renee, watching the town slide past the small square windows, thinking about nothing in particular and everything at once. Renee made notes on a tablet. Occasionally she looked up at him with that same professional assessment, checking his color, his alertness, his breathing, and once she said without looking up from the tablet, "You got family in town?" "No," Ethan said. "Where are your parents?" A pause. "Not here." She didn't push it. People who work in emergency medicine learn to read the boundaries quickly. "The hospital social worker will come talk to you," she said. "That's standard. Don't panic about it." "I'm not panicking." She looked up then, studied him for a moment. "No," she said. "You're not." She said it like it meant something beyond the literal, like she was noting something she'd file away and think about later. He didn't respond. He watched the town pass. The hospital smelled the way hospitals always smell: antiseptic and recycled air, and something beneath both of those things that wasn't quite fear, but was adjacent to it. Ethan was put in a small treatment room, and a doctor, young, fast-moving, the kind of resident who had clearly not slept in longer than was medically advisable, stitched the cut on his left palm with 8 neat sutures and rebandaged both hands, and told him in very direct terms that he should not use his hands for any heavy lifting for at least 5 days. Ethan nodded and did not mention that his life didn't currently involve a lot of days where heavy lifting was optional. The doctor left. The room went quiet. Ethan sat on the exam table with his newly bandaged hands in his lap and his backpack between his feet, and he looked at the ceiling and he let himself, just for a moment, just a few seconds, shake. Not dramatically, not like the movies, just a fine tremor that moved through his arms and his chest and said, "That was close. That was very close. That was the closest you have ever been, and you knew it the whole time, and you went anyway, and then it passed, and he breathed, and he was still." He picked up his backpack. He was going to leave. That had been the plan, in the vague way that surviving people have plans. He would let them treat his hands. He would nod at whatever the social worker said, and then he would walk out of here and back into the invisible world where he'd existed for the past 8 months. And this would become one of those things that happen and then receded the way things do when there's no fixed point in your life for them to attach to. He stood up. The door opened. The man who walked in was not a doctor, was not a social worker, was not anyone associated with the hospital at all as far as Ethan could tell. He was somewhere between 50 and 60, built like someone who had spent decades doing physical work and had never entirely stopped. Gray at the temples, a full beard going silver, wearing a plain dark jacket that was slightly too heavy for July. His hands, when he pushed the door open, were thick and scarred in the particular way that suggested a history of work that had not always been legal or safe. He was not alone. Two other men were visible through the still open door, staying in the hallway, not entering, but present in a way that filled the space. The man looked at Ethan. Ethan looked at him. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then the man said in a voice that was surprisingly quiet, not soft, not gentle, just low calibrated to carry without effort. "You Ethan Cole?" Ethan set his backpack down again slowly. "Yeah. I'm told you're the one that pulled my daughter out." The room contracted. Everything got very specific and very clear. Ethan had known this was coming. He'd had the ambulance ride and the stitches and the ceiling to prepare for it. He had told himself it would be fine. He had told himself a lot of things in the last hour that he was no longer entirely sure about. He looked at the man and said, "Is she okay?" The man was quiet for a moment. Something moved across his face, not softened exactly, but shifted. Like a door that had been locked from the inside had been touched just briefly from outside. "She's in surgery," he said. "Broken arm, fractured ankle, laceration on her face. She lost blood, but not..." He stopped, cleared his throat, continued. "Not too much. They say she'll be okay." "Good," Ethan said. And then, because it was true and he didn't see any reason not to say it, "I'm glad." The man studied him. "How old are you?" 17. "Where are your parents?" Ethan looked at him steadily. "I'm alone." Something passed between them, an acknowledgement, not quite understanding, but the beginning of it. The man looked at the backpack, at the bandaged hands, at the worn jeans and the second-hand shirt. He was reading Ethan the way experienced men read situations, not jumping to conclusions, but assembling information. And Ethan could see in real time the picture assembling itself behind the man's eyes. "Victor Ryder," the man said finally. He didn't extend his hand, but he said his own name the way people who are used to their name having weight say it, not arrogantly, just factually. "This is what I am. This is what you're dealing with." Ethan nodded once. "I know who you are." Ryder's expression didn't change. "Most people, when they know who I am, they either want something from me or they're scared of me." He paused. "Which are you?" Ethan thought about that for one honest second. "Neither," he said. "I just didn't want your daughter to die under a truck." The silence that followed was the longest 5 seconds of Ethan Cole's 17-year life. Then Victor Ryder did something that Ethan did not expect, had not predicted, and would remember with clarity for the rest of his life. He sat down, not threatening, not positioned, just sat in the plastic chair beside the exam table like a man whose legs had decided they were done, holding the weight for a moment. He put his elbows on his knees and his face in his hands for exactly 3 seconds, Ethan counted, and then he pulled his hands away and looked at the floor. "She called me this morning," Ryder said. "So what?" "Ashley, she called me to tell me she was riding over to meet the chapter for the parade. I told her, be careful." She said, he stopped again. She said, "Dad, I'm always careful." He made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "She's 21 years old and she thinks careful is the same thing as safe." Ethan didn't say anything. There was nothing to say to that. "I got the call from Danny Castellano," Ryder continued. "He's been friends with the chapter for years. He told me..." Ryder looked up, then directly at Ethan, and the full weight of his attention was a physical thing. "He told me a homeless kid crawled under the trailer to get her out, while 100 people stood there filming." His jaw tightened. 100 people. "They were scared," Ethan said. He didn't know why he said it. Maybe because it was true. Maybe because he didn't want the simplicity of contempt for people who hadn't moved, because he knew how fear worked and what it did to the body's decision-making. "Were you scared?" Ryder asked. Ethan looked at his bandaged hands. "Yeah." "Then what's the difference?" Ethan thought about it. "I don't know," he said honestly. He searched for the right words and didn't find them, so he used the only ones that were accurate. "I just didn't want to be one of the people who watched." Ryder stared at him for a long moment. Then one of the men in the hallway knocked on the open door. Ryder looked up. The man, broad, maybe 40, wearing the same kind of jacket, said quietly, "She's out of surgery. She's asking for you." Ryder stood. He was steady again. Whatever had momentarily softened had been recontained, put back in its place with the practiced efficiency of a man who had long ago decided that certain emotions were acceptable in private and nowhere else. He looked at Ethan. "You're staying," he said, "not a request." "I wasn't planning." "You're staying." He said it again in exactly the same tone, and this time, Ethan understood that the distinction between this being an invitation and an instruction was not one he was going to be allowed to make. He set his backpack down for the third time. Ryder walked out. The two men in the hallway followed him, and one of them, without being asked, without any discussion, positioned himself just outside the treatment room door. Not blocking it, just there, present, the way a certain kind of person is present when they want you to know they're aware of you. Ethan sat back down on the exam table. He looked at the bandages on his hands. He looked at the door. He looked at the backpack. 32 cents. Cracked phone. Electrical tape where the strap should be. He wondered, not for the first time but with greater urgency than before, exactly what category of situation he had just walked himself into. The answer didn't come. But 15 minutes later, something else did. The social worker arrived, a woman named Patricia, mid-50s, reading glasses on a beaded chain clipboard, the kind of practiced compassion that comes from years of trying to help people in circumstances that don't respond well to compassion. She sat across from Ethan and asked him her questions in a careful, non-threatening order. His name, his age, his living situation. He told her the truth. He'd stopped lying about it months ago. Lying was exhausting and ultimately useless, because the truth always showed in the shoes in the backpack, in the way a person held themselves when they'd been sleeping outside. She made notes without visible judgment, which he appreciated. "I want to connect you with some services," she said. "There's a transitional housing program through the county that has some availability right now." "I've been on that wait list," Ethan said. "Since February." She paused, looked at her clipboard. "Under Cole, Ethan Cole." "Yeah," she made more notes. "I'll make some calls tomorrow," she said. "Okay, I'll escalate this." She looked at him over the reading glasses. "What you did today?" "What I've been told you did, that matters. I want you to know that I'm going to make some calls." "Okay," Ethan said, "because it was what you said." She left. Ethan was alone again. He thought about the list, the February list, the phone number he had been calling every 3 weeks, the recorded message, your place on the wait list has not changed at this time. He thought about the 42 different places he'd slept since February, the way he'd mapped the city in terms of safety and risk, which doorways were tolerant and which weren't, which parking garages were unlocked, which shelters had beds, and on which nights, which gas station bathrooms stayed open through the night, and which ones the staff locked at 10. He thought about how invisible you become when you're home, not metaphorically. Literally, the way people's gaze slides past you, the way you can be standing 2 feet from someone, and they will look through you the way you look through glass, because acknowledging you requires acknowledging something about the world that is easier not to acknowledge. He thought about the woman at the parade who had shifted her cooler away from him. He thought about Ashley Ryder saying, "I'm always careful," to her father on the phone this morning, and how that sentence had a particular texture now, with everything that had happened after it. He thought about Victor Ryder sitting down, and then the door opened again, and the man standing in it was not Victor Ryder, and was not the social worker, and was not anyone Ethan expected. He was young, mid-20s, wearing the jacket, same wing skull patch, but something in his bearing was different from the men in the hallway, wound tighter, more edge. His eyes moved around the room the way eyes move when they're used to scanning for problems, and when they landed on Ethan, they stayed. "So you're him," the man said. Ethan looked at him. "Depends on who you're asking about." "The kid who pulled Ashley out." He said it without inflection, which was its own kind of tone. "That you, Yeah." The man walked in without being invited, leaned against the wall, crossed his arms. He looked at Ethan with an expression that was not quite hostile and not quite friendly, and was doing a lot of work in between. "My name's Marco," he said. "I've been writing with this chapter for 6 years. Ashley." He paused and something shifted. Ashley's like a little sister to a lot of us. You understand what I'm saying? I think so, Ethan said. What I'm asking. Marco stopped, looked at the ceiling briefly like he was recalibrating something. What I'm asking is what you wanted from it, going in there, what you expected. Ethan looked at him steadily. I expected to get her out, he said. That was it. Nobody does something like that for nothing. I don't think it was for nothing, Ethan said. I think she's alive. That's not nothing. Marco studied him. The studying went on longer than comfortable. Ethan held it without flinching, not out of bravado, but because he was genuinely too tired for performance. You got a place to stay, Marco asked finally. The question was unexpected enough that Ethan's answer was honest before he could shape it. Not tonight, no. Marco nodded slowly, like information had just been filed somewhere, like a calculation was running that Ethan wasn't entirely party to. Ironhawk wants to talk to you, he said. After he's with Ashley, you don't have to. He paused on that, and both of them understood the pause. I mean, you're not obligated, but he wants to talk. I know, Ethan said. Marco looked at him one more time. Then he pushed off the wall and walked out, leaving the door partially open, and Ethan could hear him talking in the hallway, low, quick words he couldn't make out, and then quiet. Ethan sat with his bandaged hands and his 32 cents in the particular knowledge that sometime in the next hour, the most feared biker on the West Coast was going to walk back through that door. He thought about leaving. He genuinely thought about it. Stood up, looked at the door, measured the distance, considered the man in the hallway, considered his own body, considered the cracked phone and the empty wait list and the laundromat doorway he'd slept in last night. And then he sat back down. Because the truth was, and he understood this with the clarity of someone who had very little left to lose, that for the first time in 8 months, he was sitting in a room where people knew his name, where people had looked directly at him. Not through him, not past him, at him. And even with all the fear that came attached to that, even with all the uncertainty about what Victor Ryder's version of gratitude looked like in practice, he wasn't ready to go back to invisible. Not yet. The hallway was quiet. The bandages on his hands were white and clean. Somewhere in this building, a 21-year-old woman with a broken arm and a fractured ankle and 8 stitches on her cheek was waking up from anesthesia. And somewhere very close, her father was walking back toward this room. Ethan Cole sat up straight, squared his shoulders, and he waited. I noticed you wrote 350 words, but based on the story structure and your requirements, 10 to 15 mini climaxes twists every 10 to 12 minutes for a 2-hour YouTube video. I believe you meant 3,500 words like part 2. I'll write part 3 at 3,500 words to maintain consistency. If you meant 350, let me know and I'll adjust. Victor Ryder walked back into the room 14 minutes later, and he was a different man than the one who had left. Not softer, not harder, just recalibrated. Like something had been confirmed that he'd needed confirmed before he could move forward. He stood in the doorway for a moment, looking at Ethan, sitting on the exam table with his bandaged hands and his backpack between his feet, and whatever calculation he'd been running since Danny Castellano's phone call apparently reached its conclusion because he walked in, closed the door, and sat down in the same plastic chair as before. She's awake, he said. Good, Ethan said. She asked about you before she asked about the pain medication. Ryder said it without particular expression, but the fact that he said it at all told Ethan it had landed somewhere significant. First thing out of her mouth before she even asked what time it was or how bad the damage was, she said, "Is the boy okay? The one who came in after me?" Ethan didn't respond. He didn't know what the right response was. I told her you were down the hall, Ryder continued. She said, "Ay, tita." He stopped, and for just a fraction of a second, the control slipped. Something raw moved across his face and was gone. She said, "Don't let anything happen to him." He paused. My daughter, 21 years old, just out of surgery, and her first instinct is to protect the kid who saved her. The room was quiet. She's like her mother, Ryder said, and that sentence carried so much weight that it bent slightly under its own load. He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. Ethan looked at his hands. She was calm, he said, under the truck. After the first few seconds, she was really calm. She did exactly what I told her to do. Ryder nodded slowly. She's tougher than she looks. I know, I could tell. Something passed between them. Not warmth exactly, not yet, but the early architecture of it. The acknowledgement that they had both seen the same person clearly and the same person had been worth seeing. Then Ryder leaned forward, elbows on knees, the posture from before, but without the collapse behind it. This time it was deliberate, the posture of a man who was about to say something he'd thought through. "Tell me about yourself," he said. Ethan looked at him. "What do you want to know?" "Everything. Start wherever you want." Ethan was quiet for a moment. People didn't ask him that. People asked him if he needed food, or if he had ID, or if he was on any substances, or whether he'd registered with the county services office. Practical, categorical questions that were really just attempts to sort him into the right box. Nobody said, "Tell me about yourself," like they actually wanted the full answer. He started talking. He kept it simple and true. Born in Sacramento, moved to Fresno when he was 9, when his father took a job at a distribution center. Parents split when he was 12, not violently, just the slow erosion kind of split that's almost worse because there's no clear moment to point to, no incident to build the story around, just the gradual disappearance of something that had once held the structure together. His mother remarried. His stepfather was not a cruel man, but he was a man who had wanted a different life than the one he'd gotten, and Ethan was a daily reminder of what that life contained. By 16, staying had become harder than leaving. So he left. He didn't say it dramatically. He just said it the way it had happened, as the logical conclusion of an accumulation of smaller things that never individually seemed like enough to justify leaving but collectively made staying impossible. "I've been in Hollister about 4 months," he said. "Before that, San Jose for 2 months. Before that, Stockton." Ryder listened without interrupting. Without the expression that people sometimes got, the one that was trying to be compassionate but was actually just uncomfortable, and the discomfort showed. He just listened. "School?" he asked when Ethan stopped. "I finished sophomore year before I left. Ethan paused. "I've been keeping up with stuff on my own. The library lets me use the computers." "What stuff?" "Reading mostly. History. Some math." He paused again. "I was going to be an engineer. Before." Ryder looked at him steadily. "What kind of civil?" "I used to build things. Models, structures. I was good at figuring out how things held together. What made them stable." He looked at his bandaged hands with a brief, humorless expression. "Turns out that's useful for other things too." Ryder almost smiled. It didn't fully form, but it was there at the edges. "Why didn't you run?" Ryder asked. The question came without preamble, and Ethan understood immediately what he meant, not from the crash, but from the hospital, from this room, from the knowledge of who was coming. "Where would I go?" Ethan said honestly. "That's not an answer. It's part of one." Ethan met his eyes. "I didn't run because I didn't do anything wrong. And I've spent the last 8 months being invisible because I didn't have anything. I'm not going to run from the one moment in 8 months where somebody actually saw me." The silence after that was the kind that had texture to it. Ryder sat back, studied him. "Marco said you have nowhere to stay tonight." "Marco talks a lot for someone who was in the room for 4 minutes. Marco's good at reading situations." Ryder's voice was neutral. "Is he wrong?" Ethan looked at the backpack. "No." "Then here's what's going to happen." Ryder stood, back to his full height, back to the version of himself that filled doorways. "You're going to come with me. We've got a house, a proper house, not a clubhouse, a family house about 6 miles from here. You'll have a room, a bed, food. Nobody will bother you." Ethan stared at him. "I know you don't need it," Ryder said. "I'm not offering it because you need it. I'm offering it because my daughter would not be breathing right now if you'd done what 100 other people did and stood there with your phone up." His voice didn't rise. It never rose, but it carried. "And I don't leave debts unpaid. That's not who I am." "I didn't do it to create a debt," Ethan said. "I know that too. That's actually why I'm offering." Another silence. Ethan processed it. He thought about the laundromat doorway. He thought about the wait list since February. He thought about 32 cents. He thought about what it would mean to say yes to a man like Victor Ryder. What that opened, what that closed. "One night," Ethan said. Ryder looked at him. "Sure," he said. The word had the quality of someone who knew that one night had a way of becoming something else, and was content to let that happen on its own schedule. He walked to the door, paused. "There's something Ashley wants," he said without turning around. "Before we leave, she wants to see you." Ethan's chest tightened. "She doesn't have to." "She wants to." Ryder turned just enough to make eye contact. 5 minutes. Then we go. He left. The man from the hallway, a different one, now younger with a quiet, watchful energy, appeared in the doorframe. Not blocking, just present. "I'll take you up," he said. Ethan picked up his backpack. Followed. The elevator opened onto a floor that smelled of industrial cleaner and the particular stillness of a place where people were being very carefully kept alive. The young man, he said his name was Des, offered it the way you offer something small but genuine, stopped outside a room at the end of the hall. "She knows you're coming," Des said. "Just she's still pretty out of it from the anesthesia. Don't be surprised if she says something weird." "Okay," Ethan said. "And hey," Des looked at him directly for the first time. He was maybe 23, 24, with the kind of face that was still young enough to show what it was feeling before it could stop itself. What it was feeling right now was something complicated. "What you did, I want you to know that I know what that took. I've been in situations." He paused. "Not like that, but I know what it means to choose to move when your body is telling you to run." He paused again. "So, yeah." Ethan nodded once. "Thanks." Des stepped aside. Ethan pushed the door open. Ashley Ryder looked smaller than she had under the truck, which was disorienting because under the truck she had been pinned and broken and barely conscious. But here in the hospital bed with her left arm in a cast and her cheek stitched and her color still ash pale, she looked like what she actually was, a 21-year-old woman who had come very close to the edge of something permanent and was now on the careful side of it. She turned her head when he came in. Her eyes found him, and they were clearer than they'd been under the trailer the anesthesia was wearing off, and something in them shifted immediately. Something that looked a lot like relief. "You're okay," she said. Her voice was rough from the breathing tube they'd removed an hour ago. "Your hands, stitches on one, I'm fine." "Sit down," she said. "You look like you're about to leave." He hadn't realized he was standing with his weight already shifting toward the door. He pulled the chair beside the bed and sat. She looked at him for a long moment. He let her look. People who'd been through what she'd been through needed to verify with their own eyes that the things they remembered were real. "I remember your voice more than your face," she said finally. "It was dark under there." "Yeah. You told me your name was Ethan." "Still is." The corner of her mouth moved, not quite a smile, but the shape of one. "I kept thinking." She stopped, swallowed carefully. "I kept thinking, who does this? Who just crawls in after someone they don't know?" She looked at him with a directness that reminded him oddly of her father. The same quality of attention. "Who are you?" "Nobody special," Ethan said. "That's not true, Aurora." She said it firmly, like she was correcting a factual error. "That is genuinely not true, and I need you to not say that." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "My dad told me you're staying tonight. At the house. He offered," I said, "one night." "Be more nights." Ethan looked at her. "You don't know me." "I know that you crawled into a burning wreck for me," she said. "I know that you stayed calm and you talked to me like I was a person and not a problem to solve. And I know that you got me out." She held his gaze. "I know enough." He didn't answer. The word enough sat in the room between them with more weight than a single word should carry. "My dad doesn't offer things," Ashley continued. "I want you to understand that. He doesn't offer things to people he doesn't respect isn't even the right word. He doesn't make room for people he doesn't see as real." She paused. "He sees you as real." Ethan looked at his bandaged hands, at the 32-cent electrical tape cracked phone reality of what he was carrying. "I'm going to tell you something," Ashley said, and her voice shifted quieter like she was reading something from somewhere internal. "The last thing I remember before you got to me, before I heard your voice, I had decided I was done. I thought, this is it. I'm under this truck and no one is coming, and this is it." She stopped, and then I heard you say, "Hey." She looked at him. One word. "Hey," and I decided not to be done. The room was completely still. Ethan felt something move through him that he didn't have a name for and wasn't going to try to name. "I would have come for you anyway," he said, "whether you decided or not. I was coming." She nodded slowly. "I know," she said, "but it helped to decide. She closed her eyes for a moment, fatigue and medication, and the enormous weight of having survived pressing down on her. "Stay," she said without opening them. "At the house. Just stay for a while." He looked at her. At the canteen, at the stitches on her cheek, at the particular peace that had settled over her face now that she confirmed he was real and breathing and present. He thought about Ryder sitting down, about Des in the hallway, about Marco's question, "What did you want from it?" and the answer that still stood unchanged, nothing except that she'd lived. He thought about Invisible, about February, about the wait list, about 32 cents. He looked at the backpack on the floor beside the chair. Then he looked at Ashley Ryder asleep and now her breathing slow and steady, alive in every exhale. "Okay," he said quietly, to no one or to her or to some version of himself that had needed to hear it. "Okay." Outside the room in the hallway, Des was leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. When Ethan came out, he looked up. "She good?" he asked. "Yeah," Ethan said. "She's good." Des nodded, pushed off the wall, started walking. Ethan followed, and neither of them saw at the end of the hallway the man who had just arrived and was now standing very still, watching Ethan's back as he walked away. Not Ryder, not Marco, not anyone from the chapter. A man in plain clothes, no jacket, no patch, holding a phone, a small recording device barely visible in his palm, and a press badge clipped to his shirt pocket that read Central California Chronicle. He had been there for 11 minutes. He had been recording for 8, and the story he'd just captured, a homeless teenager, a biker legend's daughter, a hospital hallway, had just become something far larger than a 4th of July accident. By morning, the footage would be everywhere, and Ethan Cole's invisible days would be over, permanently, whether he was ready or not. The Chronicle article went live at 6:47 the next morning. Ethan didn't see it first. He was asleep, actually asleep in an actual bed, in a room with an actual door that closed for the first time in longer than he could precisely calculate when Marco knocked twice and pushed the door open without waiting for an answer, which was apparently how Marco operated in all situations. "Up," Marco said. "Now." Ethan was awake before the second word. 8 months of sleeping in places where sounds meant danger had rewired something in his nervous system. He didn't ease into consciousness anymore. He arrived in it fully instantly, body already reading the room before his mind caught up. Marco was holding his phone out. The screen was bright with a news article, and above the article, a video thumbnail that Ethan recognized immediately: the intersection at Route 9 and Madison, the overturned trailer, and a figure in a worn backpack moving toward it while a crowd stood back. The headline read, "While 100 people filmed, one homeless teen moved the boy who crawled into the fire." Ethan stared at it. "How many views?" he said. As of 10 minutes ago, Marco looked at the phone. The video on their social page, 2.3 million. The number meant nothing and everything simultaneously. Ethan sat up, looked at his bandaged hands, looked at Marco. "Who filmed it?" he asked. "Reporter named Curtis Webb. He was in the crowd, had a press badge. Nobody noticed him specifically because everyone had a phone out." Marco paused. He got the whole thing, not just the pullout, the conversation with Danny Castellano after. The paramedic, he got you saying your name. "Does Ryder know?" "Ryder's the one who sent me up here." Ethan was on his feet. "What does he want to do?" Marco looked at him with an expression that was not quite readable. "That's what he wants to talk to you about." He was downstairs in 4 minutes, still in yesterday's clothes because they were the only clothes he had, backpack over one shoulder. Auto habit, the instinct to be ready to move, was apparently not something one night in a real bed could erase. The kitchen was large and warm and smelled of coffee and something being cooked, and there were 3 men Ethan hadn't seen before sitting at a long table, all of them looking at phones, all of them with the particular alert stillness of people tracking something that was moving fast. Ryder was standing at the counter. He had a coffee mug, but wasn't drinking from it. He was reading something on his own phone, and when Ethan came in, he looked up with an expression that was entirely unreadable. "Sit down," he said. Ethan sat. Ryder put the phone face down on the counter. "The article names you," he said. "Full name, Ethan Cole, 17, no fixed address. The reporter—" He paused and something tightened in his jaw. "The reporter has been thorough. He found your school records from Fresno. He found a police report from 8 months ago, vagrancy citation that was dropped." He found a statement from the gas station on Clement where you sometimes bought coffee. Ethan absorbed this. How do you know all of that? Because I had someone read the full article before I had them read it. Ryder picked up the mug, looked into it. There are 9 follow-up requests from TV stations already, 3 from national networks. The story is, it's moving faster than I expected. What does that mean for you? Ethan asked directly. Ryder looked at him. For me, he set the mug down. I don't love my daughter's name being in national news attached to a motorcycle accident. I don't love the attention that comes with that. His voice was measured. But that's not the question I'm thinking about right now. What question are you thinking about? I'm thinking about what happens to you, Ryder said. When something like this hits this size and it's going to keep growing. I've been watching these things long enough to know it doesn't stay a story. It becomes a situation. People are going out to want to find you, talk to you, get something from you. And right now you don't have, he stopped choosing the word carefully. You don't have infrastructure. You've got nowhere to be, which means you've got nowhere to protect yourself from what's coming. Marco from across the room said quietly, the county services office has already called the hospital asking for information on the minor involved. Patricia, the social worker, she's not releasing anything, but she called here. Ethan looked at Marco. She called here. Ashley gave her the number last night before she fell asleep. Marco shrugged like this was straightforward. Ashley's thorough. Ethan sat with this for a moment. A 21-year-old woman fresh out of surgery had given a social worker a phone number for a boy she'd known for 20 minutes under a truck because she was thorough. The specificity of it, the intentionality hit him somewhere he hadn't expected. One of the men at the table, older broad, hadn't spoken yet, looked up from his phone and said, there's a comment thread on the Chronicle article that's got 40,000 replies. Most of it is people trying to figure out where the kid is now. He looked at Ethan without apology. That's you. People are looking. What kind of people? Ethan asked. All kinds, the man said. Some good, some, he tilted his head, complicated. Ryder said, I need to ask you something and I need you to answer it straight. Okay. Is there anyone family former guardians? Anyone who, when your name goes national, might surface with a claim on you? Legally, financially, anything. Ethan thought about his mother, about her husband and their house in Fresno, and the last conversation he'd had with either of them, which had been 8 months ago, and had ended with a door closing. My mother has a new family, he said. She's not going to surface. Your father, I don't know where he is. Ryder nodded. Okay. He said it with the finality of someone closing a file. Then here's what I want to propose. The kitchen was very quiet. Even the men at the table had put their phones down. I know a lawyer, Ryder said. Good one, corporate background, fully legitimate. I want you to understand that. Her name is Sandra Key. She does work for the chapter, but she also runs a separate practice, no connection to the MC. I want her to speak with you today, not to represent my interests, to represent yours. Ethan stared at him. Why? Because in the next 48 hours, people are going to start approaching you. Media nonprofits, well-meaning strangers, less well-meaning strangers. And you need someone in your corner who knows how those conversations work. I can't pay a lawyer. I didn't ask you to. Ryder, I told you last night, Ryder said, and his voice had that quality again. Not loud, never loud, but carrying, filling the room without effort. I don't leave debts unpaid. This is not charity. This is not pity. This is a man who had a debt and is addressing it. He held Ethan's eyes. You understand the difference. Ethan looked at him for a long moment. At the kitchen, at the men at the table who had all he realized positioned themselves as casually present in a room with him without once making him feel surrounded. At the coffee cup Ryder was still holding, still not drinking, and the particular tension in the man's grip that said the composure was real, but it was also work. Yes, Ethan said. I understand the difference. Good. Ryder finally drank the coffee, made a slight face it had gone cold. Sandra will be here at 10. Until then, eat something. There's food, Dan. He walked out of the kitchen, just like that. The conversation was done because the relevant things had been said, and Ryder was apparently not in the habit of lingering past the relevant things. Marco slid a plate down the table toward Ethan. Eggs toast, something that smelled like actual home cooking. Ethan looked at it. Don't make it weird, Marco said. Just eat. Ethan ate, Sandra Key arrived at 10:05 in a clean car, in a suit that was professional without being severe, carrying a leather case, and the specific energy of someone who had handled complicated situations for long enough that complicated no longer unsettled her. She was somewhere in her mid-40s, Korean-American, with sharp eyes behind thin-frame glasses and a handshake that was brief and firm, and said, "I am taking this seriously, and so should you." She sat across from Ethan at the kitchen table. The other men had cleared out, leaving them alone, and she opened a legal pad and said, "I've read the article. Tell me what you haven't told anyone yet." Ethan liked her immediately. He told her everything. The real version, not the simplified one he'd given Ryder, not the managed one he'd given Patricia. The full timeline. Sacramento, Fresno, the specific day he'd left, the 8 months, the wait list, the 32 cents. She took notes without expression. Occasionally she asked a question, precise, factual, no editorializing. When he finished, she set down her pen. "Here's what I see," she said. "You are a minor who has been living without adult supervision for 8 months in a state that has mandatory services for unaccompanied minors, which means there are some conversations that need to happen with county services that we can't avoid. What we can control is how those conversations happen and who guides them." She folded her hands. "I also see that in the next week you are very likely to be approached with offers. Possibly money GoFundMe campaigns are already starting. I've seen 3 in the last 2 hours. Possibly housing arrangements from well-meaning people who have watched a viral video and want to help. Possibly media interviews with significant payment attached." Ethan looked at her. "I don't want to be a story." "You already are one," she said, not unkindly. "The question isn't whether you're a story. The question is whether you control how the story is told or whether it gets told around you while you're standing in the middle of it." She picked up her pen again. "I've been doing this for 18 years. I've seen what happens when a person becomes publicly visible without representation. It's not good even when the people doing it have good intentions." She paused. "Especially when they have good intentions. What do you recommend?" She looked at him steadily. "I recommend you let me make 3 calls this morning. 1 to county services to get ahead of that conversation and frame it correctly. 1 to the Chronicle reporter to establish that you have legal representation and that any further contact should go through me. And 1 to..." She checked her notes. "A woman named Dr. Ellen Marsh who runs a transitional housing program through UC Santa Cruz that I've worked with before. She has actual beds, actual services, and critically, she's equipped to work with a minor who is about to be publicly visible in a way that a standard county program is not." Ethan processed this. "You've already thought about the UC program before I told you any of this." A small, precise smile. "I read the article at 7 this morning. I started thinking at 7:02. He almost smiled back. "Ryder called you before he woke me up." "Victor called me at 6:50, she said. "He said, and I'm quoting directly, 'The kid needs a real advocate, not someone cleaning up after things go wrong.'" She paused. "That's about as direct a referral as I get." Outside the kitchen window, a car slowed on the street. Then another. Marco's voice came from somewhere in the house, low-clipped, talking to someone. Ethan heard words like perimeter and press and the particular sharpening in tone that meant something was being managed. "How many people are outside?" Ethan asked. Sandra glanced toward the sound without alarm. "When I arrived, there were 2 vehicles that I didn't recognize as chapter-affiliated. One had a camera set up visible through the window." She looked back at Ethan. "This is what I mean about moving quickly." Ethan looked at his bandaged hands on the table. He thought about 2.3 million views. He thought about 40,000 comments. He thought about people trying to find him some good the man at the table had said. Some complicated. He thought about 8 months of being invisible and how in less than 24 hours he had become something people were actively searching for. He thought about whether those 2 things were actually as opposite as they felt. "Make the calls," he said. Sandra nodded and picked up her phone. Ryder came back into the kitchen as Sandra was finishing her second call. He leaned in the doorway, not entering, just present, and looked at Ethan with that same reading the room quality. "Marco says there are 3 press vehicles on the street." "I know," Ethan said. "You want to talk to them?" "No." "Good." Something settled in Ryder's expression, not relief exactly, but alignment, like an answer had matched a preference. Not yet, anyway. What does not yet mean? Ethan asked. Ryder looked at him for a moment. It means that if you're going to speak publicly, and eventually you're going to, because this doesn't shrink, it grows, then it should be on your terms, your words, your time. You've done this before, Ethan said. Managed press. Ryder's expression shifted the closest thing to humor that Ethan had seen on his face. A man in my position develops certain skills. Sandra clicked off her third call and looked up. Dr. Marsh has availability to speak with Ethan this afternoon. She can have a provisional housing arrangement ready by tomorrow if we want to move in that direction. She looked at Ethan. She also said, and I'm passing this along without editorializing, that she has a connection with the Hollister Unified Adult Education Program that could get you back into a classroom environment within 2 weeks. The kitchen went quiet. Not dramatically, just quietly. The way a room goes quiet when something important has been said and everyone is giving it space. Ethan stared at the legal pad in front of Sandra, at his name at the top written in her precise handwriting, at the words Transitional Housing and Education Program below it in clean, clear letters like a list of things that were possible. 2 weeks, he said. Provisional enrollment, Sandra said. But yes, Marco from somewhere behind Ethan said nothing. But Ethan heard him shift his weight, the small sound of someone adjusting their position because something in the room had changed. Ryder looked at Ethan. That's something you want? Ethan thought about the library computers, about keeping up with things on his own, about civil engineering and how things held together and what made them stable, about saying I was going to be an engineer in a hospital room and hearing the past tense of it and hating the past tense of it. Yeah, he said, that's something I want. Ryder nodded once. Done. Filed. Then Des appeared in the kitchen doorway, the young one, the one from the hospital hallway, who'd had something genuine on his face when he couldn't stop it. He was holding his phone out toward Ryder. His expression was the carefully neutral face of someone delivering information they're not sure about. You need to see this, he said. Ryder took the phone, read, his jaw tightened once briefly. He handed the phone to Ethan. It was a social media post not from the Chronicle, from a separate account, with a verified badge and 300,000 followers. A man named Gerald Pruitt, who described himself in his bio as a community advocate and concerned citizen, had posted a thread. The thread included the Chronicle article, the video, and then Ethan's stomach tightened a series of screenshots. Screenshots of Ethan's vagrancy citation from 8 months ago. His school disciplinary record from Fresno. One incident in 9th grade, a fight that had started because someone had said something about his mother, and Ethan had responded physically and regretted it immediately, but it was on the record. A quote from an unnamed source described as a former Fresno neighbor who said that Ethan had always been troubled and that the family had struggled with him. The final post in the thread read, "Before we make a hero out of a homeless teen with a violent history, maybe we should ask who we're actually celebrating. The Hells Angels are using this kid as a PR stunt. Don't be fooled." The thread had 42,000 likes. Ethan set the phone down. He was very still. He was aware of everyone in the room watching him, and he was focusing very hard on keeping his breathing even, on not letting whatever was moving through his chest reach his face. "One fight," he said quietly. 9th grade, the other kids started it. "I know," Ryder said. "The vagrancy citation was dropped." "I know that too." "The neighbor," Ethan stopped. He didn't finish the sentence because he didn't actually know which neighbor it was, and the not knowing made it worse, made it larger, made it the kind of ambiguous wound that was harder to address than a specific one. Sandra had already taken the phone from the table. She was reading the thread. Her expression had tightened into something very focused and very precise. "This is actionable," she said almost to herself. The former neighbor quote, with no attribution, the implication of a direct connection between the Hells Angels and Ethan's actions. This is actionable. "I don't want to sue anyone," Ethan said. "You don't have to want to," Sandra said crisply. "I just want you to know the options." "What I want?" Ethan stopped, started again. He looked at the table, at the legal pad with his name on it, at the bandages on his hands. "What I want is for people to understand that I didn't go under that truck because of who she was. I went because she was there. That's it." He looked up. She was there, and she was alive, and I went. No one spoke. Then Ryder said, You know what you just said is going to be in every article written about this for the next 5 years. I don't care about articles. I know, that's why I'm telling you. Ryder looked at him steadily. People who don't care about how they're perceived tend to be perceived most accurately, in my experience. It was the most philosophical thing Ethan had heard Ryder say. He stored it somewhere. Sandra was already on her phone typing rapidly. I'm drafting a response statement. Short, factual, released under your name with my contact as the representative point. It addresses the disciplinary record, the citation, and the characterization. She looked up briefly. I'm also going to call Curtis Webb at the Chronicle. He started this story. He has a vested interest in getting it right. Marco said from the doorway, Webb's been trying to reach the house since 7 this morning. Good, Sandra said. He'll be in. Then he'll pick up. Ryder looked at Ethan. You doing okay? It was a simple question. Straightforward. The kind of question that in most circumstances Ethan would answer automatically. Yeah, fine, I'm good. The reflexive self-sufficiency of someone who had learned not to lean on answers. But he was sitting in a kitchen where someone had made him breakfast and a lawyer was fighting for him before he'd even asked. And the most feared biker in California had just looked at him with what was unmistakably concern, and the honest answer surfaced before he could redirect it. I don't know, he said. Ryder nodded. Like that was the right answer. Like I don't know from this specific person in this specific moment was exactly what honesty sounded like. That's fair, he said. He put his hand briefly on Ethan's shoulder, the same gesture Danny Castellano had used the day before, firm and short and full of things that men like this didn't know how to say out loud, and then he walked out again. The morning moved fast after that. Sandra made her calls. The statement went out at 11:42. By noon, 3 of the largest accounts that had shared the Pruitt thread had added corrections or deleted the posts entirely. The Chronicle ran a follow-up by Curtis Webb, who it turned out had all the footage from the original shoot and had kept segments he hadn't published yet, including a clear and unambiguous recording of Ethan emerging from under the trailer, both hands bleeding, and immediately asking the paramedic, is she okay, before he'd said a single word about himself. Webb called Sandra at 12:30. He wanted an interview with Ethan. A real one. Extended his words, let him tell it in his own time. Ethan said he'd think about it. At 2 in the afternoon, Ryder's house had 6 press vehicles on the street outside. Marco had set a perimeter, the chapter's word for it, though in practice it meant 3 large men with crossed arms standing at the property line in a way that was technically not obstructing anyone, but was making everyone feel strongly that staying on the sidewalk was the right choice. At 3, Ashley called from the hospital. Ethan was in the kitchen when Ryder's phone rang, and Ryder answered and then held the phone out without ceremony. She wants to talk to you, he said. Ethan took the phone. Hey, did you see the Pruitt thing? Ashley's voice was stronger than the night before, still rough at the edges, but present. Yeah, I want to go on camera. Ashley, I want to go on camera and tell exactly what I remember, she said. I want people to hear what happened under that truck from the person who was there, because she stopped, and the rawness in her voice wasn't from the breathing tube this time. Because some guy with a verified account is trying to make you into something you're not, and I was there, and I'm not going to sit here in a hospital bed and let that happen. Ethan looked at Ryder across the kitchen. Ryder had the careful expression of a man who was deliberately not influencing a decision. You just had surgery yesterday, Ethan said. I know when I had surgery, I was there. He almost laughed. It almost came out. Let Sandra set it up, he said. If you're going to do it, let her set the terms. A pause. You have a lawyer, apparently. Another pause, and then something shifted in her voice, a warmth that wasn't quite surprise, but was close to it. Good, she said. That's good. And then Ethan. Yeah, I'm glad you're still there, at the house. He looked at his backpack sitting by the kitchen door where he'd put it down when he came in for breakfast. Still packed, still ready. Me too, he said. He handed the phone back to Ryder. Ryder took it and said a few quiet words to his daughter and hung up. He looked at Ethan. She's something, he said, not proudly or not only proudly, like he was acknowledging a force of nature that had come from him but exceeded him. Yeah, Ethan agreed. She is. Outside, one of the press vehicles honked at another, some dispute about parking space. Marco's voice rose briefly, then settled. Normal chaos of an abnormal situation. Ethan looked at his backpack. He picked it up, set it down, looked at it. Then he did something he hadn't done in 8 months. Something so small it shouldn't have meant anything, but did. He unclipped the left strap, the one held together with electrical tape, and set the backpack against the wall in the corner. Not by the door, not positioned for exit, just put it down. Des, passing through the kitchen, glanced at the backpack and then at Ethan and didn't say anything. But he nodded once small, the kind of nod that means I see that and it matters, and kept walking. The afternoon light came through the kitchen window. Sandra was on her third call. Down the hall, someone was watching the news and Ethan could hear his own name being said in a broadcaster's voice, which was one of the stranger experiences of his 17 years. He sat at the kitchen table. He looked at the legal pad with his name on it and the list of possible things below it. He was not invisible anymore. He wasn't sure yet what he was instead. But the list on the legal pad was specific and real and written in ink, and for the first time in 8 months, tomorrow was not a blank space he was just trying to survive into. It was something he might actually be allowed to plan for. The news broadcast down the hall said his name again. The press vehicles on the street weren't moving. The bandages on his hands were clean and white. And somewhere in this city, 2.3 million people who had never heard of Ethan Cole 24 hours ago now knew exactly who he was. What they didn't know, what none of them knew yet, was what was coming next. What was coming next would silence a room of 120 people who feared nothing and nobody. But that was still hours away. For now, Ethan Cole sat at a kitchen table with a backpack no longer positioned for escape and let himself, for the first time in a very long time, simply be somewhere. The interview request from Curtis Webb had been sitting in Sandra's inbox for 18 hours when Ethan finally said yes. Not because he'd changed his mind about wanting to be a story. He hadn't. He still felt the same quiet resistance every time he heard his name come out of someone else's mouth, with that particular weight that meant they were talking about a symbol, not a person. But Sandra had said something to him that evening that he couldn't stop turning over. She'd said, "The story is already out there, Ethan. The only question is whether your voice is in it." So he said yes. Webb came to the house the following morning. He was younger than Ethan had expected, late 20s, a little rumpled, with the specific nervous energy of someone who knew they were sitting on something significant and was trying not to let that knowledge make them clumsy. He had a recorder and a notebook, and he set both on the kitchen table and looked at Ethan across them like someone who understood that the equipment was secondary. "I want to start before the accident," Webb said. "I want to start with who you are." "The accident is the story," Ethan said. "The accident is what happened," Webb said. "You're the story." Ethan looked at him for a moment. Then he started talking. He told it straight. No performance, no shaping. Sacramento, Fresno. The door that closed 8 months of learning how a city looks from the outside of everything. He talked about the library computers and the civil engineering textbooks he'd been reading, and the way he used to build models as a kid, miniature bridges, small structural things, and how he'd kept that part of himself alive in his head, even when everything else had been stripped down to the daily mechanics of survival. Webb listened and wrote and didn't interrupt except for one moment when Ethan described the morning of the 4th, the parade crowd, the engine sound, the woman who had shifted her cooler away from him 3 minutes before everything changed. That detail, Webb said quietly, not writing, just looking at Ethan. The cooler. "What about it?" "That's ball." Webb stopped, seemed to be choosing. "That's the whole thing, isn't it? That's the entire story in one moment." Ethan looked at the table. "I wasn't thinking about her when I moved toward the truck. I wasn't thinking about proving anything. He stopped. "I heard it. I looked. She was there. And you went. And I went." Webb wrote it down, exactly as Ethan had said it. The interview ran 2 days later, not as a news article, as a long-form feature, the kind that publications ran when they knew they had something that deserved space. Sandra had negotiated the terms full review of any quotes attributed to Ethan before publication, no photographs without consent, no disclosure of the Ryder house address. Webb had agreed to all of it without negotiation, which told Ethan something about the man's priorities. The piece ran on a Thursday. By Friday morning, it had been read 4 million times. Ethan read it once alone in the kitchen before anyone else was up. He read it the way you read something about yourself written by someone else with a constant low-level dissonance, the gap between how events felt from inside them and how they appear assembled on a page. Some of it surprised him. Not in content it was accurate, but in the way it landed when he read his own words reflected back. I just didn't want to be one of the people who watched. He'd said it without thinking in a hospital treatment room, and here it was the sentence that 3 million people had apparently put in their social media bios by Friday afternoon. He closed the article and sat with his coffee and thought about the woman with the cooler. He hoped she read it. He hoped it didn't make her feel bad. He genuinely wasn't sure which outcome he preferred, which itself seemed like important information about something. Ryder came downstairs at 7 and looked at Ethan's face and said, "Good or bad?" "Accurate," Ethan said. Ryder nodded. "That's the best you can ask for." He poured coffee and sat across from Ethan, and they didn't say anything for a few minutes, which had become a comfortable rhythm. Ethan had discovered that Ryder was a man who did not fill silence because he was uncomfortable with it. He filled it only when he had something to say, which meant that when he spoke, it was worth listening to. "Ashley's being discharged today," Ryder said. "I know, she texted." Ryder raised an eyebrow, barely just a fraction. "She texted you." "She's been texting me for 2 days." "She has her own phone back," Ryder said in the tone of a father who understood that this was just information, not something he was going to do anything with. "She wants to do the web follow-up interview," Ethan said. "She asked me if I thought she should." "What did you tell her?" "I told her it was her story to tell or not tell." Ryder looked at his coffee. "That's the right answer." A pause. "What do you think she should do?" Ethan thought about Ashley in the hospital bed, saying, "I want to go on camera," with her voice still rough and her arm in a guante. He thought about the specificity of her, the way she'd said, "I'm always careful," to her father, and the way she'd decided under the truck not to be done. The way she'd given Patricia the phone number before she fell asleep. "I think she should do it," he said. "I think she has things to say, and I think they should be in her own voice." Ryder nodded. "Yeah," he said, "and she does, and they should." He drank his coffee, set the mug down. "Dr. Marsh called Sandra yesterday evening," he said. "The housing is confirmed whenever you're ready, and the enrollment they pushed it through. 2 weeks was optimistic. They're saying next week if you want." Ethan looked at him. "Next week." "Monday, actually, if you want." Next week had been a concept. Monday was a date. Ethan felt the difference in his chest, the way something abstract becomes weight when it becomes specific. "I want," he said. Ryder nodded. Done, filed. Then, and Ethan had learned to watch for this, the moments when the composure moved aside, just slightly. He looked at Ethan with something that was not quite paternal and not quite anything else that had a clean name and said, "You're going to be fine. I want you to know I believe that." Ethan looked at him. "You don't really know me." "I know what I've seen," Ryder said. "In 3 days, I've seen you refuse to be afraid when you had every reason to be. I've seen you tell the truth when the easier thing was to shape it. I've seen you put the backpack down." He paused on that last one. "Marco told me." Of course Marco told him. Ethan felt something move through him that was almost embarrassment and almost something warmer, and he redirected it by looking at the table. "It's just a backpack." "It's not just a backpack," Ryder said, "and you know it." He stood. Conversation done. But at the doorway he stopped and turned and said something Ethan would carry for a long time in the specific way you carry things that hit you when you're not ready for them. "My daughter is alive because you chose to care," he said. "In a world where choosing to care costs something, and it always costs something you paid without counting. That's rarer than people think." He looked at Ethan steadily. "Don't let anyone talk you out of being the kind of person who does that." Then he left and the kitchen was quiet, and Ethan sat with it. Ashley came home that afternoon. She walked in on crutches with her arm in a sling and a line of stitches on her cheek that she was apparently choosing to regard with complete indifference. And the first thing she did when she came through the door was look for Ethan. He was in the hallway. She saw him and said, "Good, you're still here." "I said I'd stay for a while," he said. "I know what you said." She maneuvered past him toward the living room with the crutches competently already as if she'd been using them for months. "I just wasn't sure you'd actually do it." "I'm actually doing it." She settled onto the couch, propped her leg up, and looked at him with the same direct attention that her father had. "Sandra said the housing is ready." "Monday." "And school?" "Also Monday, apparently." She smiled, a real one, the first full smile he'd seen from her, not the hospital bed versions that had been tentative around the stitches. Civil engineering, she said. Eventually, it starts a lot more basic than that. That's fine, you'll get there fast. She said it with the certainty of someone who has decided something and is not taking questions. Ethan looked at her. You are very sure of things. I almost died under a truck, she said. I don't have time to be unsure of things. She paused. Also the interview with Webb. I'm doing it. Okay. I wanted to tell you directly, not through my deck or Sandra. I appreciate that. I'm going to say what I remember, she said. Exactly. The dark in your voice and the way you said your name like we were being introduced somewhere normal. She looked at him steadily. And I'm going to say that there were 100 people with phones and one person who moved, and that says something about all of us that we need to sit with. The room was quiet. That's going to make a lot of people uncomfortable, Ethan said. Good, Ashley said. Uncomfortable is where things change. He didn't respond, but he thought about it for the rest of the afternoon with the particular focus he usually reserved for structural problems, turning it over, examining the load-bearing elements, testing where it held and where it might give. The evening of Ashley's first day home, something happened that nobody had planned for and nobody could have predicted, and it began the way so many significant things begin with a phone call. Marco took the call in the hallway. Ethan heard the conversation in fragments from the kitchen. Not words, just tone, the way Marco's voice shifted from its normal, managed watchfulness into something lower and more careful. He came into the kitchen 2 minutes later. There's something happening outside, he said. They went to look. The press vehicles were still there. Fewer now, 3 instead of 6, the story settling from breaking news into ongoing coverage. But they were not what Marco had meant. What Marco had meant was the motorcycles. They had been arriving for the past 40 minutes, according to Des, who'd been watching from the upstairs window. Single bikes at first, then pairs, then groups. They parked in the street beyond the press vehicle's engines, cutting off one by one the silence of each arriving engine, adding to a cumulative quiet that had its own quality, intentional, weighted, chosen. By 7 in the evening, there were over 100 bikes parked in the street, Ryder standing beside them. Not moving, not talking loudly, just there. Ethan stood at the window and looked at them. Who are they? He asked. He knew some were chapter. He recognized a few faces from the past 3 days, but not all of them, not most of them. There were cuts from different chapters from what he could see, different states, different affiliations. Marco stood beside him. Word moved, he said simply. That's how it works. Something happens that matters, and the word moves. They came for Ashley, Ethan said. They came because of what you did, Marco said. For Ashley, yeah, but also he stopped unusual for Marco, who generally knew exactly what he wanted to say. Also because it meant something. To men who have seen a lot of things mean nothing for a long time, it meant something. Ryder appeared beside them. He looked at the street. His expression was unreadable, but in the particular way of something being felt too fully to be shown. How many? He asked. 120 last count, Des said from behind them. Ryder looked at Ethan. They want to see you. Ethan felt his stomach tighten. I don't know what they want me to say. You don't have to say anything, Ryder said. That's not what this is. He looked at the window again. This is in my world. When something matters, you show up. You don't send a text. You don't post something. You show up. He paused. 120 men showed up. Ethan looked at the street, at the still figures, at the engines off, and the silence that was not empty but full of something he didn't have a precise word for and didn't need one. Okay, he said. He went to the door. Ryder opened it. They walked out together. Ethan and Victor Ryder side by side, which was not something Ethan had planned or considered, and which was apparently not something Ryder had planned either, but which happened naturally the way things happen when they're right. The press cameras went up immediately. 3 reporters started moving forward, and Marco and Des materialized between them and the walkway with the quiet efficiency of people who had practiced this without ever rehearsing it. Ethan walked to the edge of the property and stopped. He looked at 120 men looking at him. The silence was enormous, not uncomfortable enormous, the way large spaces feel, the way standing at the edge of something that has no ceiling feels. The press cameras were rolling, but they felt distant. The reporters were saying something, but the words weren't landing. What was landing was this: 120 people who feared very little in this world had come here, had ridden however far they'd ridden, had turned their engines off and stood in the street because something had happened that they felt needed witnessing. One of them, an older man, heavy-set gray beard, a patch that said Nevada on his jacket, stepped forward from the crowd. He didn't speak. He looked at Ethan for a long moment, and then he put his right fist to his chest over his heart and nodded. One gesture. Nothing theatrical. Ethan felt it move through him like a current. Then another man did it. Then three more. Then in a wave that moved through the crowd, the way sound moves through water, not choreographed, not planned, simply one person watching another and understanding all of them. 120 fists over 120 hearts. Complete silence. The press cameras were absolutely rolling. Ethan was aware of this distantly, the way you're aware of weather you're not currently standing in. He was aware that this moment was going to be described and analyzed and contextualized and argued about in comment sections and opinion pieces for months. He didn't care about any of that right now. He looked at these men, hard men, men who had built their lives around codes that the world mostly misunderstood and occasionally feared, and he thought about what Marco had said. Something happens that matters and the word moves. He thought about Ashley saying uncomfortable is where things change. He thought about the woman with the cooler and the 100 people with their phones and the particular cost of choosing to care in a world that makes it very easy not to. He thought about 32 cents in electrical tape and the February wait list and the library computers and the miniature bridges he'd built as a kid because he'd wanted to understand how things held together. He put his own fist to his chest. He nodded back. The silence held for one more moment, long enough to mean something, short enough not to become ceremony, and then it released naturally the way hell breath releases. Men began talking quietly to each other. Someone laughed at something low and real. The crowd shifted from ritual into human, the way crowds do when they've done what they came to do. Ryder stood beside Ethan. "You okay?" he asked. The same question as that first morning in the kitchen. The same question Ethan had answered honestly then. "Yeah," Ethan said, and this time he meant it without qualification. "Yeah, I am." Behind them, Ashley had appeared in the doorway, crutches, sling stitches, and an expression that was watching everything with the full attention focus of someone who intends to remember it exactly. When Ethan turned and saw her, she looked at him and said nothing, which was the right thing, because there was nothing that needed saying. Des came to stand beside Ethan, Marco on the other side. The three of them looked at the street together. "Hell of a 4th of July, Des said finally. "Yeah," Ethan said. "You know, this is just the beginning," Marco said. "Not threatening, just factual. The housing, the school, the interviews, this doesn't simplify, it complicates." "I know," Ethan said, "and you're okay with that." Ethan thought about the backpack in the corner. Not by the door, not positioned for exit, just put down finally in a room he was allowed to be in. "I'm okay with that," he said. The Nevada man was talking with Ryder, a low conversation, the kind between men who have known each other a long time across distances. Three of the younger riders were looking at their phones, probably the article, probably the video, probably the 40,000 comment thread, and the 5 million views it had climbed to since this morning. A reporter had finally gotten close enough to start asking Marco questions, and Marco was answering them with the practiced economy of someone who knows exactly how much to give. The world was doing what the world does, processing, reacting, moving, talking. It was going to keep doing that for a long time. Ethan understood that now. He had become the kind of thing the world processes, and the world was thorough and loud, and didn't always get it right, and that was going to continue whether he was comfortable with it or not. But he was not under a truck anymore. He was not invisible. He was not carrying 32 cents toward a parade he didn't belong to. He was standing in a street in Hollister, California on the 4th day after the 4th of July, with bandaged hands, in a bed to sleep in a school enrollment for Monday morning, and a lawyer who had made 3 calls before breakfast, surrounded by 120 men who had ridden from wherever they'd ridden because something had happened that mattered, and they were the kind of people who show up when things matter. And somewhere in that house in the corner of a kitchen was a backpack with an electrical tape strap and 32 cents in the left pocket and a cracked phone inside everything Ethan Cole had owned 4 days ago. Everything the world had left him sitting against the wall. Not by the door, not ready to run. Just there in the room belonging to a boy who had finally stopped moving long enough to be found, and who had discovered in the most unlikely place that being found was not the end of something. It was where everything real begins.